the mood here. En fait, reconnu.
Yeah, good afternoon all. Welcome to our monthly webinars. Today's webinar will be focusing on the role of trade today's webinar will be focusing on the pharmaceutical industry in Africa. And in this particular webinar, we are looking at the productivity and trade. And the topic is the role of standardization in facilitating the trade, the growth of the pharmaceutical industry and trade in Africa. I will moderate this particular webinar. And in this particular aspect, what we are looking at is the kind of growth that is expected for the continent to be able to achieve the supplies that are needed in the continent. When we look at the continent, we realize that it's the continent with the highest growth potential, bearing in mind that the population is increasing, but at the same time, we also have urbanization, increased healthcare spending and investment, as well as the population is growing, we do have incidences of chronic lifestyle diseases coming in. Now, when you look at all these factors, you find that the continent does need for the growth of the industry to address the healthcare issues, the needs of the continent. But we notice that over 95% of the medicines in the continent are imported, while the continent manufactures barely 3% of all the medicines that are produced globally. In this particular sense, you realize that, again, the medicines consumed in the continent do get into disruptions in which we experienced, for example, during the pandemic that started in 2019. Now, how many of the countries manufacture medicines? There are quite a few countries, a few companies that manufacture this. And for this matter, you realize that there is need for the continent to actually improve its production capacities to ensure that we are able to manufacture the medicines, the equipment, and facilities that are required for healthcare purposes. We saw this particularly during the pandemic, that the supply chains were disrupted, and we needed to act towards ensuring that we have the necessary standards in place which would improve the production of the medicinal products that are needed, the equipment that we need, the personal protective equipment that were required for the protection of the people, and also the healthcare workers. So in that sense, you find that the standards that we started off, and I'm happy that we were able to take off in a very smooth way, the standards were aimed when we cooperated with the stakeholders in the continent to ensure that we can have the industry following good practices to make sure that we get the products into the market to serve the purpose for which they were required. So in this case, what ARSO did basically was to establish 4 committees that started off. And in that sense, we had the thesis that one of them headed by Professor Jamura Mikeka, that's the ARSO TC 78, which deals with the medical devices and equipment. And this is the one that probably mostly looked at the equipment that was required, the PPEs that were required, the surgical gowns, the face masks, and a number of other equipment that are necessary, those ventilators that were being used in the hospitals. So it was quite a good turnaround of standards, including the field hospitals, the guidelines for establishing field hospitals. If you recall that the anticipation and the experiences we had with large hospitalizations, we needed emergency field hospitals that could handle the challenges. So these are the things we put in place for TC78. Then we have the TC80, which also looked at establishing standards for things like the sanitizers, disinfectants, and other medicinal products that are necessary to handle the emergencies. So also a very good turnaround was witnessed during that time, because we had assured the emergency session of 6 months to produce those standards to address the emergencies. Then we had the TC78, the TC82, looking at the African traditional medicine. And this TC also looked at what kind of traditional medicine interventions can be used to address the emergencies. Quite a number of standards were also done in that duration. And we are looking at what are the identified medicinal products that could be used during that time. Then we had the CACO Working Group 5 under the technical regulations, which looked at guidelines, technical regulatory guidelines that could assist during that time, and it continues to work in that direction. So since we cannot produce technical regulations directly, this is the working group that deals with the guidelines that can assist countries to come up with the technical regulations that can guide that. Then later on, in the long session, we also had to activate TC74. Now this one deals with healthcare services. When you look at the kind of hospitals that we have, the level of services that they could be providing, and anticipating that perhaps you need to cut down on the time spent when people are seeking for healthcare services. The categories of hospitals, that level 1, level 2, level 3, 4, 5, 6, that will tell you this is the kind of service you expect here. And therefore, this is also another committee that has started work looking at the kind of professionals, the serving levels, and all that we require in the hospitals to address those issues. So we have quite a number of standards that were produced during that time, but we are also looking at long-term issues. What does the continent require to produce for it to be able to be almost self-sustaining in the pharmaceutical industry, bearing in mind the kind of standards that are required, the kind of services that are required, the kind of equipment that are required, the professionals who are required in this particular context. And is it possible at some point for this continent, utilizing standards and conformity assessment, to be able to provide quality and safe healthcare systems? So these are the questions that we should be looking at. What are the roles of the regulators in that? What are the roles of the new technologies in doing this? And if you look at the clinical trials, we have the guidelines, the protocols that are necessary for us to have efficacious medicines done, or vaccines done, so that we're able to address the healthcare concerns of the continent. I welcome you to this. I also hope that during this session, we shall be having those interactive questions through the chats that will evoke more responses and give us direction to the kind of needs, the direction that we need to establish for us to move forward. So I will introduce the first presenter for this particular session. And this is Professor Chomora Mikega will be our first presenter. Professor Mikega is the Director of Science, Technology and Innovation in the Ministry of Education of Malawi, and is an Associate Professor of Physics at the Chancellor University of Malawi. He also had doctorate in engineering from the Division of Physics, Electrical, and Computer Engineering at Yokohama National University, Japan, and is the chairperson of the African Standards Organization, TC78, Medical Devices and Equipment, the National Commission for Science and Technology, Pharmacy, Medicines and Regulatory Authority, and South African Development Community Regional Medical Devices Forum technical working groups. So he has also authored the chapter 10 of the Digital Africa in the recently United Nations Economic Commission for Africa published book that is existential priorities for the African continental free trade area. You can get this through the link that is provided. Professor, you have the floor. Please go forward in your presentation.
Thank you, Technical Director Ruben Gisso, for the kind introduction that you have just done, but also the opportunity to do so. I am mindful of the time that it's limited, and therefore I will make sure that I do the same, like within 5 minutes, simply to steer the discussions. I'll be speaking on the African traditional medicine and the possibility of taking this into the national healthcare systems in the continent of Africa. The presentation, therefore, will look at Africa, what is our problem, and mostly it's the abundance of raw materials, and then how do we solve these kind of problems in Africa? What could be the issues, attendant healthcare issues that ATM or the African traditional medicine would be able to address, and then the exploitation of value chains, but also regional value chains for the continental benefit. And therefore, I am mitigating and making a pledge and an attraction towards African traditional medicine into this. One of the eloquent, loquacious speakers of the old times in 1963 did say that there are resources in Africa, and it is for us to marshal them in the active service of our people. And in the mitigation and speaking of all these, he did highlight that mostly if we were able to marshal the resources that we have in the active service of our people, no African would die without cause. We would be able to remedy any situation. And this was one of the speeches from the African organization, Unity, which is now AU, and from where also the Agenda 2063 was born. And therefore, some of the presidents in the US, for example, the John F. Kennedy and also Franklin Delano Roosevelt did say to those who much is given, much also is required. And Africa is given much, and therefore much is required from Africa. So from 1963 to now, you will see that the expectation was to be able to see huge laboratories for the manufacture of drugs, but also complementary to that, the use of the plant and animal species, which is within the African traditional medicine, to complement the huge laboratory for the manufacture of drugs and discovery of drugs immediately, so that I think the African or continental healthcare system through the national healthcare system is quickly, enhanced. This is the book, the link which actually was shared by the technical director already. In this book, clearly, I do not know if the slides are flowing the way I would like to see them flow, but in this book, obviously it says, in addition to local production and regulation of medical devices and equipment.
Chair, just to clarify, Chair.
Yes.
We're sharing the presentation on your behalf. Maybe you'll just be telling us if we need to go to the next slide.
Yeah, because now I'm seeing on the devices. Please go to the next throughout. Proceed quickly to the next slides, because I was also sharing from this other device. So just proceed with that. Next. Yes, so please proceed. I have gone through all that. Yes, proceed and proceed. And yes, so here we are talking of the huge laboratories for the manufacture of drugs and drug discovery that I'm talking about, and the complementarity of the same with African traditional medicine. So let's go to the next engagement. Yes, so as we're going through this, we found that there is a repository of a book that we have published in chapter 10. I've authored on that one. Next, where I would like to highlight. Next, please. Go to the next slide. So in this, we have highlighted that we would like to ensure the quality of medicines as Africans, our member states, because that is a national security matter. You know, and pharmaceuticals value chains, for example, in some of the African regional, economies, would ensure that we avoid stockouts, supporting local incomes and jobs, triggering technology spillovers, but also addressing new challenges such as non-communicable NCDs and helping the sustainability of government and medical schemes. So let's go to the next slide. Just flip through all of them. Yes, all of them because of time. We just want to make sure that the attendant issues which we can quickly address under this include vital signs, maternal and fetal aspects, because these are part of the sustainable development goals where we have to reduce, for example, maternal mortality rate, fetal, aspects, and therefore issues of a clinic at a home or a home pharmacy, but also issues where we document in database all the aspects of traditional medicine as known by the herbarists, for example, would be issues of great interest at the moment. Let's go to the next. Next. So designing studies to enhance domestic sources of pharmaceutical products is critical for us as Africans through explorations and deeper investigation of their molecular biology and genomics, measuring and extraction of plant extracts, and assessing their pharmaceutical content. So this is what I would like to drive, especially for the research institutions, centers of excellence. Let's go next. Centers of excellence, specialization, like that. Let's go next. It's just for appreciation. The next slides. Please flip to the next slides just for appreciation to see what is in the digital imaging technologies, but we'd like to focus on the next slide because of time. Let's move, just move the slides. Let's move on. And therefore, I would like to go to the exploitation of the regional value chains. Most of the African regional blocks, ECOWAS, EA, the East African Community, SADC, and North Africa, they have specified and chosen specific, value chains, which some of them include mineral beneficiation, agro-processing, and pharmaceutical industry. So for us in ARSO, the pharmaceutical industry, taking advantage of leveraging the work of TC 74, 78, 80, and 82. 82 is on African traditional medicine. We are looking at specific aspects. For SADC region, for example, if we look at the 40, identified value chains, the 40th one is artemisinin. And artemisinin is a herb, and this is from where Artemisia annua, which is popular in Ghana and also in ECOWAS, is critical as an example of the African traditional medicine, which we should be able to promote based on the pharmaceutical, value in there. Next, we'll see also the other one is Universities Tariffs by publications, Moringa oleifera, which is very useful for three aspects which are put there to treat domestic water. Right now in such kind of a dry season, you find that most African countries are suffering from cholera because of related aspects or pathogens, including salmonella, for example. So, a traditional herb like Moringa oleifera would be able to mitigate issues of microbial load, turbidity, but also total dissolved solids to improve the water quality, make it available for consumption. Let's go to the next. Based on that, this is my last slide. I am proposing that therefore African traditional medicine, because the good book talks of use of herbs from Eden to paradise. You have herbs to leaves, You know, in that text, it says over, you know, the leaves of the trees shall be for the medicine of the nations, okay? And over 50% of following the Afrobarometer results, you know, of African continent, you know, believe in this already. And therefore, it should be very easier to attract the attention of the population of Africa to use ATM, but also national healthcare systems to have that as a critical, you know, complementary medicine for the populations. Previously, I remember that rich people, those who have gone to school, refused to have vegetable salads on their table. They believed that they needed to have more meats and treated as a sign and symbol of you know, of attaining education. But right now, because of understanding the health benefits, you find that people are, you know, citizens are able to demand, you know, healthier foods, for example, vegetables, salads, fruits, as opposed to the others. And now the cost of these has gone. It will be the same possibly with African traditional medicine, because this is the preserve of Africa we have seen over that. So indigenous knowledge systems, which have been exploited by Sunbow research, you know, consortia, you know, SADC regions and related aspects, do show us that we have a huge plant and animal biodiversity in abundance in Africa, which we could be able to exploit for our, you know, medicinal aspect, for example. Scientific research in phytochemical analysis, bioactive compounds, molecular biology, some of it, for example, at the African Center of Excellence in Public Health, you know, and medicine, family medicine, the World Bank in Malawi, looks at the identification of commonly used medicinal plants and the quality assurance of herbal medicine. So quality assurance is one of the key things which is very important. National healthcare systems in some of the member states which I've studied, as I'm concluding, do recognize traditional medicine in their, you know, sector-based policies. They do recognize that. Sometimes there's even a national policy on African traditional, on traditional medicine. Some of them have poisons board or pharmacy regulatory authorities, which, working with the sector responsible, for example, the Ministry of Health, they're able to look at issues of drug-to-drug interaction. If you're taking the medical pills as administered from the sector itself, but also adding on with the medicinal plants or related aspects, what are the drug-to-drug interaction studies outputs which talk about? And therefore, quality assurance of herbal medicine is critical in that regard. Sometimes you'd find that you might be referred to say, okay, we are not able to boost your you know, your hemoglobin level, and therefore can you have a supplement from, you know, avocado pears? This is a way of complementarity that we're talking about, and therefore issues related to that become of interest. National development blueprints, for example, in Malawi, Rwanda, South Africa, Namibia, Morocco, Egypt, Kenya, you know, you find that there would be policy goals, good practices, research funding, and regional ethics, which do guide good practices from where continental regulatory frameworks can be abstracted, but also standards, you know, developed through harmonization process, conformity assessment, mutual recognition, or reliance system, which my friends will be talking to. Just as an example there, I will show you that's Moringa. But the key thing, and lastly, the challenges is issues of functional regulatory systems on traditional medicines. They do not exist in most of the member states. Therefore, there is also a need for registration of these medicinal products in a form of a database for pharmacovigilance of traditional medicines, but also advertisements must be regulated, and regulation of medicinal claims, for example, that it treats HIV/AIDS or any related such related issues. There should be scientific methods for verification of the same. In Rwanda, Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, for example, they do recognize and put a provision that there are various forms of knowledge and innovative techniques as part of Rwanda's culture and knowledge heritage, including fields like traditional medicine. So this is how lastly we can proceed. That's the end of it. Just finish up the slides. Go to the next, please move the slides. I want to conclude. So that's in the conclusion, that shows you that at policy level in specific national policy documents, we have these already. All what remains is to exploit them to the full. And therefore, I'm just motivating a discussion going forward. I submit Technical Director and General Moderator on the aspect of ATMs or African traditional medicine as inculcated and also mainstreamed in the national healthcare system, including critical documents and regulatory frameworks and the legislative, documents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. You have touched on quite a number of very key aspects. For example, when we talk about lack of the water treatment chemicals, and yet we do have these very natural resources that we can utilize for that particular purpose. Perhaps the question that we could ask ourselves is whether we are aware of that and whether we need to raise more awareness on this. Because one, you notice that as you did hint, is that we have this particular bias towards the orthodox medicine, that is the Western type of medicines that we have adopted. So how do we overcome this kind of lack of awareness that the resources we have within our environment can actually serve to provide us with either clean water systems or the healthcare systems? What kind of awareness do we need to package to do that? That's the first kind of question that we can ask you.
All right, thank you, TD. Pretty much the African society, I do not know whether it has been part of the effects of colonialism. We have looked down on the tricks and which our forefathers, our ancestors have used before. Some of us have, seen our grandfathers, grandmothers survive without having gone to the hospitals. And the question as scientists, one of them should have been, what is it that took them through over 100 years without having sophisticated medical care in referral hospitals with highly equipped infrastructure to attain to all what is required. We have not questioned that. Until we begin to question that and look at those which the herbs, the roots, the leaves, the tricks which they had used, and then using scientific methods in our laboratories, be able to extract the value. And we have seen this over COVID. During COVID, most of us, we got sick, and maybe some of us, we still believe that we survived it because of the various aspects we have consumed. The fear has still been there. Haven't you taken it in abundance, an overdose and those kind of things? And what exactly would you isolate as being, the active compound that contributed to that? But also, what was the therapeutic target to that effect? So this must be done. It's a challenge that I'm giving to researchers, scientists, but to look back on the indigenous knowledge, the IKS, indigenous knowledge systems, traditional and cultural expressions. These are protocols member states have signed already, and it simply requires to go back into there and have research. A good example is South Africa. South Africa has exploited the indigenous knowledge, and using the Council for Scientific Industrial Research, CSIR, at Melaka, they are able now to produce, come up with medical, products which are attracting big companies like Pfizer, the one which promoted the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, to come down to Africa. And I'm sure Rwanda is one of them, to see how can we now do this together. I'm sure this is an area where Africans can work more and do it better and bigger for the masses, so that at least we offset the trade balance in the first place. We have more exports, less imports, but also, stop externalization of, forex and resources, but build also local production industries, which actually is an issue, a matter of the African Free Continental Trade Area, FCTA. And these we have articulated in the book, chapter 10 and other chapters, which I've shared before. Thank you, TD. I think that I've addressed the issues of awareness and what we need to do. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I think you also understand that in ARSO we are passionate about African traditional medicine. And I do see a great future for it. We shall be coming back to you in due course, again, for further inputs in this particular aspect. And I think the audience needs to know how to access the book and, of course, read about what we need to do so that we can exploit the resource and enhance our livelihoods. I think most of us would like to live beyond 100 years. And you can ask yourself, like recently, my grandmother passed on at 124. So what is it? She never used to go to hospitals until she died. So these are the things that we really need to ask ourselves and understand what were the medicines that these people are using. Very interesting. Thank you very much. I'll go now to our second presenter, Jean Fidel Bashono, a senior program officer at the African Medicine Quality Forum at the AU, the AUDA NEPAD, and is Fulbright alumnus and a professional in good manufacturing practices, certified and global regulatory affairs compliance. So since April 1st, 2022, he was hired by the German Institute of Metrology as a senior program officer at the African Medicines Quality Forum and working under the MRH initiative, a program at the AUDA NEPAD, based in Midrand, South Africa. So he has been a member of our African Traditional Medicine TC. It started as THC 13, but is now called the Technical Committee number 82. And he was representing Burkina Faso during that time. So he's also in the ARSO CACO, that's ARSO Conformity Assessment Committee, Working Group 5, which deals with the pharmaceuticals and medical devices producing regulatory guidelines. So from 2018 from November 2018 to March 2022, he was the technical director of the ProFarm a private farm plant in Ouagadougou. So he is qualified person responsible for quality assurance. So from 2009 to 2018 October, he worked as a researcher at the Center Muras, Bobo-Tioulasso of Burkina Faso, during which period he was acting as a biochemical lab responsible for 2 years and then responsible for nutrition and toxicology research unit. This is, from what I know, this is a professional with a very wide experience in the medical field. And we welcome you, Dr. Jean Fidel Bashono, to give us your presentation on the role of conformity assessment and standards in the pharmaceutical industry. Welcome, and go ahead, please and present.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gisori, for the kind introduction. Can you see my screen, please?
Yes, we can see it. If you can put it in presentation mode, please.
Okay, is it in presentation mode now?
Not yet.
Is it in presentation mode?
Not yet.
Not yet. In my screen, it is in presentation mode. Maybe I will ask you to present.
Again? If not done, you can do the presentation from our side.
Okay, okay. Are you able to see my screen now? Okay.
You can see the screen. I think the lag is in the internet bandwidth.
Okay. So thank you so much for the opportunity given to me to discuss a current topic. I was asked to make a presentation on facilitating the production and access to safe and quality products for the local pharmaceutical industry and addressing the challenge of counterfeit and substandard and falsified products. And then the role of the conformity assessment and standards and other the quality program, the quality infrastructure program. My presentation will follow this outline. In introduction, we can say that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the vulnerability of African countries in terms of availability of drugs. African production capacities are concentrated in 8 countries, bringing together around 80% of total local production in Africa. In this map, we can see in blue that only 4 countries, Algeria, Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa, have more than 50 manufacturers, while 22 countries have no local production. So, boosting local pharmaceutical manufacturing requires implementation of a holistic set of complementary initiatives that we are going to review in this presentation. The pharmaceutical production in Africa is facing many challenges. Counterfeit, substandard, and falsified products are one of the main challenges in pharmaceutical production because African countries have deficiencies in terms of qualitative and quantitative analysis. Indeed, we have a weak regulatory framework in Africa countries and weak test capacities for quality control. So there is impossibility for them to meet international requirements like current good manufacturing practices, bioequivalence testing, and so on. All these prevent African countries, African local country, manufacturers from entering international market as well as global tenders. We have also the lack of access to finance. As you know, many people around Africa have a very good project, but it's impossible for them to have a bank or any institutional finance institution to get formed and implement their project. Africa has very few local or regional pharma manufacturing companies. There are roughly 375 drug makers around, and most of them are based in North Africa to serve a population of around 1.1 billion people. We can mention also the inadequate human resource capacity that hampers the growth of Africa pharmaceutical sector. Last but not the least, we have the issue of patents with Big Pharma. That means that Africa pharmaceutical manufacturers are not able to produce in generics many molecules because of patent issues. To promote pharmaceutical production, HEMARACH, African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization based in Midrand in South Africa, has some technical committees to fight against counterfeit and substandard medicine in Africa. But first, in 2007, AD and EPAD tried to address Africa over-reliance on import pharmaceutical by developing the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, PMPA, as per the 2005 decision of African Union Heads of State Assembly. The PMPA's business plan highlights the urgency of addressing the challenges facing by the industry. One of these challenges is the lack of affordable financing and modern technology, which hampers business expansion. African manufacturers who currently operate in small, fragmented markets cannot compete with their Asian counterparts who operate in much larger markets and therefore benefit from economies of scale. Economies of scale help companies save money through larger product volumes. African medicine regulatory harmonization technical committees like African Medicine Quality Forum is committed to fight substandard and falsified medicine in Africa by strengthening national quality control labs, allowing them to be able to test quality of medicine. The current GMP Technical Committee is committed to strengthen the national regulatory authorities' inspection capacities. The Regulatory Capacity Development Technical Committee is committed to strengthen national regulatory authorities as well as regional economic communities regulatory framework. And then we have also the HAVAREF. The HAVAREF is the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, and the HAVAREF is a network of African national regulatory authorities and ethic committees that uses harmonization and reliance as pillars for capacity building. HAVAREF work to ensure collaboration between key stakeholders across the continent, including donors, health professionals, and regional economics, by promoting joint reviews and the sharing of work expertise. The PAVM, the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, was established by the African Union in 2021 to deliver a bold goal, enabling African vaccine manufacturing industry to develop, produce, and supply over 60% of the total vaccine doses required on the continent by 2040. Keep in mind that nowadays, only 1% of vaccine are produced in the continent. And the last point of MRH initiative is HAMA, and HAMA is the African Medicine Agency. We are working right now to operationalize this one, and it will be the right framework to address all issues related to pharmaceutical industry. So HAMA will support the growth of local pharmaceutical production, a key objective of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, the PAPM, the PMPA, sorry. It will further play a critical role in catalyzing trade in support of the Africa continent free trade area. HAMA will evaluate medical products for the treatment of priority disease as determined by the African Union. It will also regularly inspect, coordinate, and share information about products that are authorized for marketing. HAMA will coordinate joint reviews of clinical trials, application for vaccine, and assessment of a highly complex product dossier, such as biosimilar. HAMA will also coordinate joint inspection of API manufacturing sites. The African Medicine Agency will coordinate with regional economic communities and national medicine regulatory authorities in the identification of substandard and falsified medical products and facilitate information sharing across countries. And last point, by developing common standard and regulation, HAMA will also be responsible for harmonizing legislation. To address and solve all these issues, African government, African Union should take courageous actions, and for African government, they should take strong political commitment to support private sector. Private sector will be the key for the pharmaceutical production in Africa. They should also put more money in research and development. They should also put money to capacity building to produce API, and raw materials. They should invest to scale up operation, modernize equipment, and resolve local infrastructure, and particularly national quality control labs. And obviously, all governments should ratify the African Continent Free Trade Area Agreement. Because this one in 2050 will give we will have 2.2 billion people around all the continent. Regarding now African Union, African medicine regulatory harmonization can be the key element to implement all conformity around the continent. So to implement standards and guidelines developed by ARSO. MRH can also work closely in collaboration with ARSO regarding guidelines and standards by the technical committees like AMQF and GMP-TC. And the final point will be to translate and disseminate all available guidelines and standards elaborated by ARSO in dealing with pharmaceutical and medical devices. So that will be the last point of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fidel Bashiano, for that presentation, which gives us a very good review, seeing that the continent is actually in the process of establishing a very robust, framework to work on the issues of the quality and safety of the medical pharmaceuticals and medical devices that the continent needs. Now, the question that perhaps that you have answered is how we will be handling issues of collaborating between institutions. Still, I think the prevalence or the common availability of counterfeit medicines and medical devices is a challenge that we still face in the continent. How do you foresee that this can be addressed? Can standards address this? Can the conformity assessment address to reduce the availability of counterfeit medicines and medical devices in the continent? And how can this be achieved?
Thank you so much, Mr. Kisori. Yeah, definitely conformity assessment and standard will be the key to address counterfeit and falsified medicine in Africa, because they define the framework to address this kind of issue. Conformity assessment is important for suppliers, consumers, and regulators. So for suppliers, they will need guideline standards well documented for them to be able to have the right raw materials. For consumers, based on conformity assessment and standards, they will be confident on the Africa products, because nowadays around the continent, people are not confident regarding the medication because many of them are fakes or counterfeit. We can use the framework of ARSO together with MRH together and see how we can face these issues by sharing the guideline around Africa and get the national control lab to comply them, to get the national regulatory authorities to comply the conformity assessment and the standards developed by ARSO.
Thank you very much, Fidel. I think we will come back to you before the end of the session to look at your views at the end of that will ensure that we have reduced. I think the biggest concern that the continent still has is, controlling the counterfeit medicines, particularly those targeting very common diseases like malaria, and then others. How do we move forward in that? Can we have databases? Can we have whatever? But I think those are the questions we shall be coming back to you towards the end of our webinar. So right now I want to welcome Dr. Pauline Wairimu, who is the Assistant Director of Pharmacy and Poisons Board in Kenya. She's a specialist in the pharmaceutical devices. She's a senior health systems technical expert with 10 years of experience working at the regulatory authority for Kenya. She has been instrumental in the development of the regulatory framework for the health technologies, which include medical devices and diagnostics for Kenya. Dr. Wairimu has represented Kenya as the delegate for the World Health Assembly from the 68th to the 72nd World Health Assembly. She is a policy expert in the areas of public health, intellectual property, and trade, and currently a panelist for the dispute settlement case at the WTO. She holds a master's of advanced studies in international strategy and adaptive leadership, focus on global health diplomacy, international negotiation and policy making, global legal instruments, drug policy, intellectual property, and public health from the Graduate Institute of Geneva. Dr. Wairimu, Pauline, we welcome you, and we have a lot of expectations to share, for you to share with us the public health regulatory challenges that the continent faces from your experience. Please welcome for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Technical Director, and it's always a pleasure to join you. I think the introduction is quite well. I'm humbled, although I was wondering whether that's me as you are reading all about it. We've had several interactions. I'm trying to share my screen while at it so that I can be able to, so that I'm able to communicate and relay my message with you this afternoon. So bear with me as I do that. Please confirm if you can see my screen.
Yes, it's okay. You can see it.
Super, excellent. Yes, thank you again, Ruben. And I think as I've listened to the two presenters who've done an excellent job, I was also looking and wondering and thinking to myself, this is an industry, the pharmaceutical industry is an industry with multiple stakeholders and multiple players. And as national regulatory authorities, our role is often, in many ways as government, looked as the solution or the ones having solutions to just about every issue. Most of the times it is the case. And some other times we do need to look out to partners like the Standards Organization, who are the custodians and help us to develop standards. So this afternoon, I'm going to try and address the two questions that I was asked. I am seeing that I am having a slight challenge. Allow me as I navigate to see whether I can address it so that I'm able to move to my next slide. Yes. And my role today was invited to be able to speak on standardization in the scope of us facilitating trade in Africa through the growth of the pharmaceutical industry. Like I said, the two participants who presented before me have done an excellent job, but I'm going to try and also share experience with regards to, as a regulatory authority, what do we do? What are the challenges and what are the opportunities that I see? And how exactly can we bridge the challenges, the opportunities with players and stakeholders that are often external to the government agency? So this to me is what really, in a nutshell, encompasses a national regulatory authority. We develop standards, we develop regulations, we develop and ensure and enforce compliance. We put together and put in place rules, and also ensure that we have, as custodians to and as really gatekeepers to our market, we are supporting and ensuring and fostering access to the market in a manner that is promoting access and also affordability at the same time. So a national regulatory authority is often faced with challenges and opportunities. Our role in terms of when speaking on regulation is laying foundations with regards to putting together regulations that are favorable, but also that are going to safeguard and protect the public from counterfeited, from substandard, from poor quality products. And in ensuring that we put down regulations, we are often looking and having to examine policies that are new, policies that are in place, policies that need to be put in place, and through that being able to advise and offer a role that is both to our ministries of health, to the public, and to other stakeholders that are involved. In terms of compliance, once we develop regulations, we enforce those regulations for compliance. It's imperative to note that compliance goes hand in hand, because once a regulation is developed and it's not complied to, it does not then serve the purpose that it ought to serve. So for example, in pharmaceutical industry, we put together regulations that will allow or foster acceleration. So we put down guidelines, we put together specifications, we put forward standards that are going to promote and ensure or enhance access to a product. In compliance, then we look at, once a regulation is put, or once a product is in the market, what needs to be done to maintain the standard of that product being in the market. And this is where we enforce the need to report, the need for adverse event reporting, the need for ensuring that substandard and falsified medical products are removed from the market, withdrawing and rejection, and also fostering and supporting manufacturers to be able to meet the compliance or the regulation that we have put in place as national regulatory authorities. Like I said, in tandem with that are policies. And policy is often an overarching and an over-government entity or procedure. We inform or we work with the ministries of health to ensure that the policies that are in place are accessible, are enforceable, but also policies that are up to date. So we must be able to keep abreast with new information. We must be able to be agile in ensuring that the policies that are of the day, for example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, we did have to consider out-of-box policies to ensure that we were able to safeguard and provide products that were necessary: COVID vaccines, in vitro diagnostics, personal protective equipment. We saw the need to adapt and to have agility in terms of regulatory decisions and policies put in place to be able to support and to be able to respond to the demand of the public. Tandem to that is standards, and standards are really important and central.
Dr. Pauline, I don't know whether you are moving your slides, because we are still stuck on the...
No, I have not moved from this slide.
Okay.
Yes, I'm coming to that, because this first slide actually encompasses the other two that are remaining for my presentation. I was talking about standards. Standards are very central to medical devices, and especially especially in medical devices, because standards ensure conformity assessment, and this is also going hand in hand with medicines. So I'm going to speak now towards the question on what do NRAs do, or what are the regulatory systems in place that can help facilitate trade in pharmaceuticals. One of the mechanisms that is known or is being promoted now is reliance and recognition. And this is where national regulatory authorities from different countries and jurisdictions can rely on decisions made by one to help and to foster acceleration of a product into a market. For example, we have countries, stringent regulatory authorities, whose decisions we are able to use, and using these decisions lessens the timeline and the time lag that it takes often for product to get into the market. We're also promoting cooperations, and this is with regards to regional economic communities. One of the presenters mentioned this, and in Africa, and especially East Africa, we've seen the East African community. This is one cooperation that is regional, but also in the African context, the Africa Medicines Agency is putting up a foundation to be able to ensure that there's cooperation and decision-making by national regulatory authorities that can support these. Mutual recognition is especially important in standards. The reason for this is because standards are universal. And if we have standards in Kenya recognized in other countries or other African nations, it means that we are raising the standards of what we are accepting to our market, but also ensuring that standards are enforceable for national regulatory authorities and decision making. I want to dwell a little bit more on these, and this is because the two questions or the discussion for this afternoon are looking at how or what are the opportunities that national regulatory authorities can harness in Africa to ensure that we foster and we provide acceleration and availability of products, which is what we are addressing. I've already touched on reliance and recognition. I'll not go back to that. I want to dwell more on harmonization of standards. And I feel this is something that is quite timely for this webinar, but also in recognizing and ensuring that we can understand how standards raise the quality of product that get to the market. Once we have standards that are recognized by different or national regulatory authorities from each of the countries. So for example, in Africa, looking across the 54 member states, if one standard that is speaking to the quality of a medical device is accepted, it means that the 54 countries do not necessarily have to go back and look at a different reference standard. That one standard is going to ensure that products coming into the market all meet the requisite standard, and this in turn actually lifts the quality of product that is granted market authorization by the national regulatory authority. It's my decision and in my strong belief that this is a direction that we are going, fostering, ensuring, and enhancing use of standards in regulatory decision making. This is something that is not commonly done because every country, as is the current practice, national regulatory authorities will enforce their own requirements, will enforce their own policies, national policies. Yet when we look at Africa as a whole, if we can have and utilize standards, we may be able to stop or lessen the time period that it takes for market authorization, lessen the time it takes to ensure that a product from the manufacturer to the point where it's getting to the patient is lessened. But most importantly is in addressing the counterfeit products. If we know that we are using a standard that is internationally recognized and all of us are conforming to that standard, then we are lessening the amount of products getting into our markets that are counterfeited. Another important, and I touched on these, is regulatory agilities by national regulatory authorities, especially during pandemic or during emergency situations. And these came into play during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since we could not rely on the traditional routes of availing products, we had to think out of the box. And one way of doing this is the use of emergency use authorization. Emergency use authorization relies and recognizes the decisions from stringent regulatory authorities, for example, other authorities that are more mature. Using those decisions, we were then able to accelerate and avail products in our markets to days that were lesser than 90. And this is historic, and this is also a demonstration of the ability for government to adapt new technologies or new ways of thinking beyond the traditional regulatory pathways that have been examined and used. The reason why I believe that these are the key opportunities that Africa can benefit greatly, and also the use of national regulatory, is because this is a direction that is being harnessed. Mutual recognition, using regulatory agility as platforms or ways to ensure that we fast track availability of product, but also ensuring that standards are accessible, easily accessible, affordable, because of course it's a resource that is costly, but also ensuring that it's one way that we can use to lessen and to remove substandard and falsified products in our market. I think one of the reasons why we can, as we have the opportunities, there's a reason or the challenges that we have seen across all markets. And these are not unique to Africa, but these are challenges that we can look at, examine, and ask ourselves how we can address them, and in so doing, actually be able to unlock some of the technical barriers that we see. And one of them is human capacity. It's extremely difficult to work with a slim or a human capacity that is non-existent. And we have seen these especially in the areas of pharmaceutical and medtech industry. These are highly specialized, highly skilled industries, and they require personnel and human capacity that are equally highly skilled. We see a lot of brain drain here, where we have experts that are often poached or often seeking to get employment out of Africa and other jurisdictions. We need to be able to retain our skill sets in the African continent in order to be able to build capacity and to be able to build the necessary or the requisite pool of human resource to be able to do the work or the work of national regulatory authorities need. The other challenge we see is documentation. And every country, if you think again to the 54 member states, if every country requires a set of documentation, this becomes extremely cumbersome for a manufacturer who's looking to provide a product in a Kenyan, or provide a product in the continent. So there's different requirements for imports, for export, or different requirements for registration, or different requirements for trading. And this in itself is challenging because it's cumbersome, it takes a lot of time, it's resource, it takes on a lot of resources. And this time delays some of the reasons we have seen manufacturers step away or not want to bring products to our market. So if we can relook at the documentations that are required, we can be able to address this challenge and be able to see and review ways of shortening. And again, this document requirements is what I spoke about, standards. If we know that, if a manufacturer knows that the same standard used in Kenya is used in Ghana and used in Namibia, Malawi, every other country, it becomes very easy to facilitate availability of that product in a market. Tariffs and tax regimes. This has been something that's been ongoing, and I'm glad that AFTCA is here and we can discuss these many times over. But this has also been seen as a challenge where differing or different tariffs and tax regimes, and sometimes depending on the language barrier, this again is a challenge that we see being cumbersome or being a block or a barrier to accessibility, and also this comes primarily from national regulatory authorities that are the enforcing entities. Another challenge is market access. Of course, different regulatory frameworks, different regulatory landscapes, different regulatory systems, ensuring or having countries that are more advanced than others. This also will cause a barrier, because if Kenya is more advanced than its neighbor, somebody may decide to go to the neighbor in order to gain access to Kenya, or gain the Kenyan market in order to gain the access to the neighbor. Again, this fragmentation or these differences that have been shown to exist in our market are a barrier, and also causing different regulatory approvals. Again, it goes back to what are the standards that we have in place? What are the requirements, or what is the benchmark in which we are using? Because then if we have different benchmarks, it automatically means we have different requirements. Some countries in Africa still lack a regulatory system and oversight. And of course, this becomes a challenge in its own. This is there's acceleration and proliferation of counterfeited products in those markets because there's nobody to check. And because of that, those markets again will trickle and find their way to markets where they have systems, again, making it a challenge for us to be able to really address. So national regulatory authorities play a critical role in ensuring and fostering availability, accessibility, affordability of products. Counterfeited products are extremely important, extremely expensive, because the amount of work that it takes to remove that product is actually more costly than the work that it takes to bring into a market a product that is well regulated. We have this challenge, which is universal and has been prominently seen, especially during the COVID-19. The manufacturing capacity in Africa continues to lag behind other continents. And local manufacturing, especially for vaccines or diagnostic specialized products, has been a challenge, and this is being especially advocated for by the African Medicines Agency as a way to harness and as a way to be able to rely on ourselves and our market and to support growth for the African continent. If we can become, one way for us to become reliant is if we can manufacture our own products. And if we can manufacture our own product, it means that technology transfer and know-how will be retained in our continent. So this is another aspect that we see we want to address, and national regulatory authorities come in play because they are able to support manufacturers locally to be able to meet the requisite standards, because the standards for international manufacturers and local manufacturers should be able to match. Tied to that is the over-reliance of imports. I think during the pandemic, we saw that Africa relies heavily on importation of even simple things like face masks. If we can address this by ensuring that we can improve and we can support our own manufacturing and also develop our own manufacturing, this is certainly going to help address and remove the barrier to trade cooperation or regulatory cooperation, and also supporting our countries and our individual capacities, and ensuring that we can become more sound in the ways we do our business. Duplication, I think I've already addressed this, the duplication of standards. If the standards used in Kenya are different from another country, obviously there's going to be existing challenges, there's going to be existing, it's not going to work where one procedure is different from one market to the other. Tied to this specifically is legislation, and this is a sensitive area because legislation for each and every country is different. If we can find ways to be able to address our legislation or individual legislation challenges, then we can be able to have the same standards that are employed across different markets. And of course, this is going to increase accessibility and affordability of the products that we let into a market. I feel that I've been able to, my presentation was short, precise, but I feel that we may be able to have a lot more of discussion on the floor because these are the challenges and these are the real, real life experiences that national regulatory authorities we face, and we are trying to address in ensuring and fostering that pharmaceutical industry is reliant in Africa. Back to you, Ruben.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pauline. I was about to request for you to finish the presentation, but you've done well. And I think quite a number of questions that we had, the questions that arise have been addressed in your presentation. And I think one is that agility, the regulatory agility that we require, which could look at a situation and relying on, other evaluations that have been done and to quickly approve some medical devices or medicines or vaccines for use during emergencies. Now, the question that still arises is perhaps, much as you pointed out about lack of regulatory framework within some countries, issues of staffing, issues of different approaches. What is your view for the future of the continent in terms of having this capacity where a product is approved in Morocco and we can utilize the same system all the way to South Africa? What is the future for that?
Thank you, Ruben. I think the future is really bright. And I say that with a lot of optimism. We are seeing what we refer as convergence, regulatory convergence. And this is where regulatory authorities are able to rely on decisions made by others. For example, in East African community, we're already seeing that medicines have, in the East African community, if across the 4 member states agree on a common decision, then the other 3 are able to take up, so that if you have 3 companies or 3 countries agreeing that this product is safe, then the other 4 take up the decision and also allow that product in their market, ensuring that in the ESC, for example, all 7 member states then approve that product. So we are moving towards the direction of regulatory convergence and harmonization. And again, the African Medicines Agency has been, is already in place to be able to see and fast track this process. So this is happening, this is taking place. We would hope to see it moving faster than it is, but then again, with our own countries and jurisdiction as they are, we can only see and wait for that process to happen. But I'm very optimistic that this process is already taking place. And this is not just in pharma, but also in medical devices. Like I said, we have the African Medical Devices Forum, and we're looking to also have a similar platform for medical devices, supporting and enhancing regulatory system strengthening in African countries.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think we will be coming back to you. Quite a number of questions I believe that are in the chat may be directed to you. And I hope that from this presentation, perhaps that the audience and some of the people will understand that the regulatory agencies are not about policing, but rather to ensure that actual people's lives are safeguarded, and then we do not have dangerous drugs or fake drugs that do not serve to treat people are not in the market. As indicated, it is very difficult to clear up once these products are in the market. It takes a lot of resources to clear them up than when you actually can prevent them from coming in. Thank you very much, Dr. Pauline. We will come back to you with more questions within the session. I will now go to the next presenter, and this is Ms. Maria Plombin. She will present to us on the decentralized healthcare clinical trials. And the whole idea is when you look at for example, you want to get vaccines approved, medicines approved, and clinical trials have to be done. How can we approach it in a manner that will make it easier, faster for the product to come to the market, using different populations that perhaps then will indicate the efficacious nature of what you have. Looking at the continent, you realize, of course, that you have different environments and a wide range of conditions that people live in. Can the same vaccine work in all these regions? Can the same drug work in all these regions? So Dr. Maria Plombin is Director of the Emerging Communities and Opportunities Development Global Business Strategy Initiative, Healthcare and Life Sciences lead of the IEEE Standards Association. She leads the IEEE Standards Association on Healthcare and Life Sciences practice, working with the global community of stakeholder volunteers who are committed to establishing trust and validation in tools and technologies that will change approach to discover therapies, deliver care, and ultimately enable sustainable and universal equality of care for all. She's the founder of Disruptive RX, an information gateway addressing the critical need for pharmaceutical and life sciences executives to connect innovation with business strategy to rethink the process of drug development and distribution value chain. She has extensive experience in building global media brands in multiple industry sectors. So we welcome you on board to share with us your presentation and experiences in this field. Please welcome.
Yes, thank you, Technical Director. This is a great opportunity to share with you all many different ideas and opportunities we're seeing across the globe in trying to accelerate clinical trials, with trying to get beyond the challenges that we have seen that obviously cause a lot of problems in the actual research process, the patient recruitment process, and overall the validation of the endpoints of the trial. So I was sharing with you today. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes,
yes. Excellent, thank you. So as the Technical Director said, I do lead the Healthcare and Life Sciences Global Practice at the IEEE Standards Association. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are a global organization. We have 400,000 members across 119 countries. We cover many different technical disciplines in electronics and electrical engineering, but we have a main mission that we share, which is excelling technological innovation for the benefit of humanity. So naturally, the healthcare life sciences practice really excels in this area of work. So, as we mentioned, we're really looking at how do we work with all these volunteers, multidisciplinary across the globe in every continent, to really understand how we can actually improve better access to quality medicines. How can we better protect and safeguard the identity, the security of patient data? But overall, the most important thing is how do we really begin to work towards these targeted therapeutics that are going to improve patient outcomes? And we want this for all. It's supposed to be equitable. And this is really an important area of our work. So when it comes to Africa, and a lot of the challenges that my esteemed panelists have mentioned are all very real, and they're not just localized to Africa, unfortunately. We are seeing them both in developed economies and other emerging economies. There are major challenges, and this is just, legacy challenges, processes that have just evolved over time, regulations not being harmonized. We're seeing this across the board. But, we have to think about Africa in a grander scope. Correct. So we tend to look at Africa and look at developing trials in the areas of communicable diseases, right? So naturally we have COVID-19, we have malaria, we have Ebola. There's just been on and on and on. And these are all very important and sustainable across not only Africa, but to the world. But we also have to look at this changing landscape of patients in Africa that can actually not only serve the African continent, but overall the development of global therapeutics. So we know that, and it's been a rising cause, that more Africans die from cancer than malaria. So this is very obviously, we can almost call cancer a pandemic because it's so omnipresent in every part of our society. There's a growing rise of chronic conditions of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And then there's the prevalence of rare diseases, right? So we know that there are certain inherent rare diseases that are, in this ethnic population in Africa that also transcend other areas of the world. So what does all this mean? So we have to look at the fact that Africa represents 17.5%, so almost 18% of the global population, but yet only 2%, maybe 3% of trials take place in Africa, which is astonishing because this is where we talk about the potential for Africa in clinical trials. There's many obviously benefits in clinical trials. There's a lot of challenges with clinical trials, but benefits, we think about bringing innovative therapies to the continent, opening the opportunities for foreign direct investment, so partnerships with global research institutions coming to Africa, and then just overall better health outcomes for patients. A lot of times it's well known that clinical trials end up being the last resort for either terminal illnesses or for just better quality of life therapeutics. But there's challenges that come with trials in general, right? So we know that there's overall a patient lack of trust in trials because just the way the process is, it's just not very transparent. And then there's the question of infrastructure, right? So, in Africa, there are some challenges with infrastructure when it comes to either it becomes medical labs, or we're looking at human capacity, or just the resources in general, as far as the facilities that are available. One of the big concerns is data quality and integrity, although I would say this is not just, again, inherent to, developing regions. We see this problem in developed economies as well. And this is also another challenge, is post-trial access of the medications to the participants and populations after the trial is completed. We hear there's really no standardized protocol, and some patients don't even know if a trial is approved, if the drug ever goes on to the next phase, if the drug ever goes to market. This is a problem we see across the board. So with that, we have, this concept of, what we're seeing come across more is this decentralized versus virtual clinical trials. And it's really important to make this distinction because we're starting to see this sort of interchange of terms, remote clinical trials, hybrid trials, virtual clinical trials, and it's becoming very, very confusing. Decentralized clinical trials, if we look at what the US Food and Drug Administration has defined it as, is the decentralization of the clinical trials process, where we're using technologies to communicate with the participants and collect data. So it doesn't necessarily mean that a patient will never see a site, will never come to a facility, nor does it mean that the patient is absolutely required to come to a site or facility. What it's saying is that at the end of the day, it's going to digitalize the process. And there's a distinction between digitization and digitalization. So what we're saying is that all the operations of that process will be digitalized, whether it comes from an informed consent process to how we recruit patients, how we exchange information with them, how we collect data from them. And this is really critical because this is the area in clinical trials that we need to establish that trust. So from there, it's really important when we talk about trials, everything's about data integrity. So the patients, of course, are center, and it's the most important part and the most important element of the trial. But the second is naturally is the data and how it's collected, procured, provenance, tracked, and utilized, and protected, of course. So we look at study design, there's an element of data integrity, there's the execution and the endpoint validation. It's really important that there's credibility in how this data is collected and transferred and stored and utilized and validated. Okay, so when we talk about these in the world of decentralized clinical trials, we're talking about really emerging digital technologies. Now, when I talk about decentralized clinical trials, first of all, I would just like to emphasize that this is not the cure-all for all possibilities, right? This is just another approach to trials which can solve some challenges that we're seeing in the traditional clinical trials process. But in the use of this type of approach to a trial, we're seeing the use of all these new emerging technologies, which are all going to require some form of global technical or data standards in order to help policymakers sort of regulate some of the challenges that might come with them of credibility and trust. So, when we look at the electronic informed consent process, right, most informed consent processes are still based on paper. However, sometimes you might get a PDF version, electronic version, depending, the protocol at the time. And what happens is that there's multiple copies of these documents, right? This goes regardless what type of clinical trial you have. There's this growing research and applications and use case and pilots in the use of these smart contracts. Smart contract is pretty much a digital contract that is pretty much predetermined on terms. So what I mean by that, it's, for instance, if the contract says that you're going to be participating in this trial is going to last 2 years, and these are going to be all the protocol, the potential side effects, all the terms of informed consent, you both sign off on this, meaning patient and investigator or trial site sign off on this agreement, but there's only one record of truth. So what I mean is there's not multiple copies of a PDF going from site to site from patient. There's not multiple, paper copies everywhere. There's one record of truth that can be accessed by both the patient and all the approved parties to use that smart contract. Inclusively, smart contracts can be appended for progressive informed consent. So by that, I mean, if there's any changes to the protocol of the trial or some other issue, it would get a term appended to the contract, to that original contract, which would be transparent to all the participating parties, including the patient. There are some opportunities that these are autonomously run. So there are some challenges around that. And this is where the development of standards is run. But these are opportunities that we're seeing to sort of automate the process and relieve some of that question of credibility and trust and auditing at the time of trial protocols and phases and reconciling. Another big use is the distributed ledger technology, blockchain. We're seeing it in the use of patient recruitment, the clinical trial supply chain auditing. We're seeing it in trial data provenance. So this is really important. Blockchain enables us as the community to really track the data without having multiple copies of the records. So again, conceptually, like the smart contract, we're looking at one record of truth that gets appended and is transparent to the respective parties. So by that I mean is one record, one patient. This is where they're recruited for. This is the smart contract they signed. This is the facility that they may be interacting with what investigator, what was done, what kind of adverse reactions they have. Everything gets trialed back to that node. And only those, you only can append to the node. You can't change the original entry. This is the immutability concept of the blockchain. So the blockchain is not exactly, it's not a database, it's decentralized. It's just data coming in from multiple sources, actually transaction data or hashed meta tags coming in and just reflecting the transaction, the chronological transaction that's happening. So in this case, the movement through the trial and the patient's record of history and that kind of thing. Why is that important? So when we talk about auditing of the trial data, there's no longer the question of what human intermediary might have changed the data, not signed off on time, might have lost a record. All of these things sort of go away. Now, you could say to me, this is just the tracking of the data, right? We still have humans behind the thing. Humans can make mistakes, right? So type in the wrong thing into the record that gets accounted for in the blockchain. So it's not a perfect solution, but what it does do, it allows that duplicity effort to go away. It allows us to track chronologically the stamps because they're immutable. And if there's an error, it's easier to find because again, we're working with one record of truth. These are just all emerging technologies. We're seeing them in different applications. It's its biggest uses in trial data provenance, but we're also seeing it in the world of patient recruitment. A lot of the new pilots coming out are looking at how patients can manage their own health data to make themselves available to be found for clinical trials or to contribute to clinical research. So the concept of verified validated data at the point of study design or recruitment is really enabled through this idea of the blockchain, which decentralizes the storage of patient data. Again, there's many, we could have like a 3-day conference on this topic, but there's many opportunities with that, but also requires a lot of areas of policy to be included, as well as technical standards development. And this is the work we're doing from the technical standards side here at the IEEE Standards Association. Another big area is artificial intelligence and machine learning. We're seeing the rise of this, especially when we look at the use of real world data going back into trial design, the inclusion and exclusionary criteria for patients. This is really important in decentralized clinical trials, how the data is being understood, the predictive analytics, the predictive reactions. This is another growing area in that. And of course, more importantly, decentralized clinical trials are enabled through the use of wearables and Internet of Medical Things, sensors that enable the remote patient monitoring side. The majority of them are in monitoring, not so much in therapeutic delivery in the point of clinical trials research. So these come with their own challenges, which we'll get to real quick. But I think we have to look at the scope of why this could be an opportunity. First of all, for patients, it does not require patients to come to a site. So if you live far away, if you're in a rural area, if you're just not able to get to a location, this is a great opportunity, depending also on the therapeutic area and what's required, to have a more diverse inclusion of patients in trials. So when we look at Africa, and we said it's about 2 or 3% of clinical trials happening there. The majority of them are either happening in Northern Africa, let's say in Egypt, and then the other in Sub-Saharan Africa is South Africa. So what really happens in between, right? There's plenty of other countries and plenty of other patients who need access and help, right? And should be part, because this is the question of inclusion and diversity that's missing in clinical trials. We cannot sit here and safely say that South Africa represents all Africans and Egypt represents all North Africans. This is not correct. And we have the same challenge across the world. We're seeing this across the board. So decentralized clinical trials starts to help us chip away at this issue of not having enough inclusion in the patient recruitment process and in the patient pools. The next step is it commands us to go into this digitalization process of the workflow. We really have to move away from these multiple hard copies, move away from losing documentation or losing even track of patients, right? Because if everything's done by paper, we might lose that paper, we lost track of the patient. There's just many challenges of not moving to a digitalization process. Now, again, digitalization requires, of course, a robust IT management system, requires obviously human capacity, storage systems, security, all these kinds of great things, but it is really going to be required to establish that trust in the data provenance. The mobile technologies allow for this real-time, we could say approximate real-time data generation capture of the patient's reaction to the trial. In some cases, we see in remote rural areas that the data is not real-time. We're not exchanging in real-time as it's catched, but what it can be is stored and then transferred at a later time, through a landline internet or where there's access and that kind of thing. So these are still sort of evolving opportunities. And then overall, we're seeing that there's a reduction in cost of trials. So trial sponsors are seeing a reduction of costs by going decentralized clinical trials, and they're condensing their timelines because the autonomous capture of data and you know the response to get patients on board is all accelerating these timelines. So we're seeing some benefits. You know, when it comes to the mobile health devices, this is what we're
Request
seeing.
that you wind up, please.
Yes, this is my last slide. So mobile health devices, we're seeing that 40% of patients, right, I just mentioned, who participate in clinical trials are lost to follow-up, right? And this is a big challenge. This is where your trial can end absolutely fast. So the use of these RPMs, remote patient monitoring devices, you know, really start moving towards the ability to better track the patient and the adherence, but they come with their own challenges. And this is a lot of the work in standards that we're doing. You know, there's a reliability issue, meaning is the patient really using the device, the cost to the sponsor of the trial to be able to give it to the patients, the validation of the data, the ease of use for the patient to actually use it. It has to be simple, it has to be feasible. And naturally, there's a concern of the cybersecurity angle, the security of the data, transmission, storage, and obviously protecting the privacy of the patient. But most importantly, there's an important element of mobile remote patient monitoring is access and connectivity. So in order for these to work, you either have to have access to mobile data transmission or obviously a Wi-Fi or some sort of element of internet to transmit the data, which is a larger issue beyond just obviously the pharmaceutical landscape. So there's some open programs, and we're going to share our slides for sure, where you all can find out these programs. You can get involved in helping us to either incubate potential ideas for standards or frameworks or best practices. All of our programs are global, so we want to bring more and more diversity, more and more global participation. These are some other programs that have education from global experts talking about a lot of these issues. And you can reach out to me at any time with ideas and how to get involved. Our door is always open here at the IEEE. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And this is an interesting area, and I think we should be able to have an opportunity at another session later, either this next year, so that you're able to present more on this.
Mhm.
Now, one of the things that is surprising, as you mentioned, is the idea that only 2.5% of the clinical trials take place in the continent.
Mhm.
Now, there has been this a very, kind of a misinformation, I could say, which displays, and I think even there are some books that have been written on Africa as a living laboratory. If you have had an opportunity to look at such, you could see a publication that says, this is the continent where trials take place, where people are not informed. They are just subjected to clinical trials, and they are not aware that they're actually participating. And the information is then shipped out without people knowing that actually they were used as subjects in such clinical trials.
Mhm.
I don't know whether you have an idea about this and whether you are aware about this, and what are the possibilities that these new technologies will fall under the same kind of categorization?
So I will say that there is across the globe mistrust or distrust in the clinical trials process because there has been such a lack of transparency. So the technology blockchain is really going to be the differentiator when it comes to the point of transparency and enabling the opportunity for patients to know what's happening to them during the process, and a little bit about when the trial ends and what's the next step forward. So I will tell you, even in the United States, in Europe, the challenge becomes people participate in a trial. First of all, they don't even know how people found out about them because their data is being bought and sold, right, without their knowledge, their health data. They're recruited for a trial and they don't even know how they found them. Then by some miracle, the person that agrees to participate in the trial happens and they don't even know if the drug failed FDA approval or whatever regulatory agency approval. They don't know if the drug ever goes to market. They don't get access to the drug sometimes after it's approved as well. They have to go through a traditional insurance payer process to try to get access to it. So this is the idea of blockchain, is to sort of minimize this challenge that we're seeing with transparency not only through the process, but after the trial has completed, and that they can be notified in such a way that doesn't compromise the IP or the integrity of the study. This is one of the benefits of using such a technology, is that you just have verifying credentials or claims that can be shared without having to disclose everything behind it. So again, these are really robust technologies. They're requiring quite a bit of digitalization and a lot of change in workflow. But the good thing about Africa as an emerging economy is that you actually don't have the legacy insanity that unfortunately all these other developed economies have, where they're trying to fix what was done poorly before and then trying to fit it into a new box and try to bring it forward. Like, this is sort of not really working here either. And so there is some great opportunities there to try to address this. The biggest issue is transparency. If we want trust in clinical trials, we need transparency for the patients. This is a must.
Thank you very much. And we will come back to you on this, the same, and perhaps if not today, in another future forum. Now I will go to the last presenter. Our last presenter is Poonam. She will introduce herself. She currently is the head of the non-tariff measures at the Division, Directorate of Trade in Goods and Competition, African Continental Free Areas Agreement Secretariat. She has held various positions including as trade expert, program manager with the International Trade Center, and then evaluator of ACP projects in the EU TradeCom 2, and as chairperson of the WTO Safeguards Committee 2009, coordinator of chair of the African, Caribbean, Pacific, the ACP group, Geneva, and vice chair of the African group on specific WTO issues. She has more than 20 years experience in international trade, investment, and private sector. And today she's here to give us a presentation on why the pharmaceutical industry remains strategic with respect to the 2030 SDGs and Agenda 2063 and the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Welcome, Poonam. We are afraid that you are the last presenter and your time may be constrained, but please try as much as possible to cover what you have to cover today. I thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to now share my screen. I hope I'm not very good at these technical, but anyway, I'm trying. Let's try. Here you go. So do you see my screen? And do you hear me correctly?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, I am the last speaker. So I think everything has been said. I don't know, I can perhaps just talk about the AFCFTA. Colleagues before me, especially Pauline, spoke a lot, and the others speakers spoke a lot about pharmaceuticals, but also about the AFCFTA, which in fact makes my life easier, right? So I'll just start by the beginning because there's a lot of people, participants online, and I don't know if everybody knows what is the AFCFTA. So just to tell you a little bit about the AFCFTA, it's a flagship project of the Africa Union. So it's a child of the AU. It aims to boost intra-Africa trade. And as of today, we have 54 countries of Africa who have signed the AFCFTA. So we are quite good. It is a first of its kind Pan-African institution, with a dual mandate, to accelerate intra-Africa trade. You see here some figures. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but you see the 54 countries who signed the AFCFTA agreement. You see here the total value of Africa exports, and what is underlined here, like previous speakers have mentioned, that the intra-Africa trade remains small compared to the whole basket of Africa exports, less than 20%. Therefore, 87 billion only is traded within Africa. Therefore, there is a high very huge potential for increase of Africa trade. And that is why we have got this, this AFCFTA. We have prioritized 4 value chains in the AFCFTA. So why we are here today in this pharmaceuticals event is because pharmaceuticals, in fact, is earmarked also in the AFCFTA as a priority for the continent. You see it here on the slide. Pharmaceuticals value of trade, 11 billion USD. It's earmarked as feasibility, you see green, economic growth green. So like everybody has been saying since this morning, this is one of the priority sector where development is possible. There's majority of demand, is met via imports, where everybody has spoken about this. Demand met by trade from Africa is less than 3%. So there is a strong opportunity for meeting the demand locally, which can increase security of supply on the continent, particularly, well, so many speakers have spoken about those diseases. So I'm going very quickly over these. The barriers and potential interventions in pharmaceutical sector also, I've heard of it from various speakers, dumping of counterfeit products, for example. We have heard about R&D and the upgrade that is needed here of the local manufacturers. I think that speakers have said a lot about this. So that's why, again, I'm going very fast, Chairperson, on these slides. Barriers to increasing production and intra-African pharmaceutical trade, again, inadequate markets of scale, limited competitiveness compared to other regions. We talked about Asia regions just before, lack of harmonization of standards. Here, lots of work is being done by yourself, also, on standards. And you know that in the AFCFTA agreement itself, there are whole articles and annexes which speak about harmonization of standards. And therefore, this is one of our aim, is to get this harmonization on our continent. The rest of it, I will not mention because, like I say, speakers have. So I'll jump into the annexes of the AFCFTA that speak to you about SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary, and technical barriers to trade, TBT. So these annexes have transparency, notification, harmonization, equivalency, exchange of information requirements. This is just to reassure you that the agreement of AFCFTA itself has got these articles and these annexes on harmonization, on transparency, SPS, TBT requirements. We have now already an MOU with ARSO and the Secretariat here, the AFCFTA in Ghana. We are working within the framework of the overall African Union SPS Coordination Forum, which means, again, to reassure participants and delegates here present on this in this forum that we are trying not to have duplication. So there is coordination among our members. Okay, this has been mentioned already. We have got a subcommittee in the AFCFTA, which is on SPS. We have another subcommittee on TBT, which the aim is to deliver the mandate of those subcommittees to avoid overlapping mandates and duplication of efforts. Sorry. Oops. I don't know if you are okay. Sorry about that. Oh. No, I am sorry. I just mismanaged completely my PowerPoint presentation. I'm trying to go quickly, and so I think that it is a challenge too. Are you still with me? I hope you're still with me. And this is a slide on non-tariff barriers, because I heard some of you mention the non-tariff barriers. I must say that the Secretariat here is facilitating also implementation of one of our annexes, which is Annex 5, which aims to progressively eliminate non-tariff barriers. So that includes non-tariff barriers in all sectors, including the sort of pharmaceutical trade. We have also a non-tariff barrier online mechanism, which is already functioning. So you can go, I would invite you to go into our website to look at that monitoring mechanism which exists, which you can use even now today, and to report non-tariff barriers that you come across when you're trading, even in this sector, pharmaceutical. So we have got now all these tools in place that can help you trade. And I would really invite you to use those tools. These tools are, of course, for the private sector to use, especially the SMEs. We encourage you to use them. Because, you know, non-tariff barriers, they are the ones who sabotage whatever gains you can make within your trading system. So please don't hesitate to use the tools and let us know about the NTBs you experience when you're trading within this sector also. Here are the tools that are online in the AFCFTA website. And you see here the non-tariff barriers online tool that I have just briefly mentioned, but there are also all other tools that are present that you can use, and so that we get feedback immediately from you, and we can immediately try and resolve your problems. This is our contact details. I know that this presentation will be shared with everybody, so you have got there my own contact details and the contact details of our team here at the AFCFTA Secretariat to help you if you need us. Thank you very much. I've been very, very quickly, but I think that most of these issues have been covered, and I would like rather to have a discussion if there is any question with regard to the AFCFTA. Thank you very much. Now I'll try to stop sharing this.
Thank you very much, Poonam. And we are grateful for your presentation. Perhaps one question that you may wish to consider, you know, when you look at the African continent, and you indicated that the first priority is, of course, the agro-processing. And these two areas, I would say that many times in the past, Africans did not consider selling of food as a business. Now, the same happens that in the area of the pharmaceuticals and medical devices, still there are people who do not think that this is a tradable product. How do we change these perceptions?
Thank you, Chair. Are you putting that question? I suppose you're putting it, yes, to me. How do we change the perception?
Yes, and if it is you know, it's a question that cuts across, but I think you try to answer that, because, you know, you are dealing with a population that in the most cases may not look at food as tradable goods, and they do not look at pharmaceuticals and medical devices as tradable goods. How do we change those perceptions?
Well, wait a minute. To begin with, Chair, there was one question I saw in the comments, and I think, I don't think panelists or somebody took that question. So if you would permit, I would start with this. There was one comment from somebody called Hassan. So if Hassan is still online, I had seen one of your comment there, one question that you had put to the panelists. And I thought that was an interesting question that you had put there. And I had some points to mention on that. You know, Chair and everybody, I would say one thing that we need to also take into consideration is how do we attract in Africa investors? How do we attract FDI? How do I attract pharmaceutical companies to come and have their manufacturing plants in Africa. I think this is an important element that we also need to take into consideration. So when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, you need companies like, you know, big major companies, for example, those who are in Switzerland, I'm thinking of, you know, major leaders. You've got companies here in Switzerland, you've got in France, in Europe, in India, you've got leading pharmaceutical companies there. And somebody, I think I saw in the comments, people saying, okay, these companies are taking raw material from Africa and are, you know, producing it, value adding in Asia and so on, and then selling those products, finished products, back to us. One thing we have to ask ourselves is, then we should invite those companies to come and invest in our continent and build the manufacturing units in our continent, do the value added here in Africa, and then we can trade in Africa or even export these products. Why are they coming? So one thing that we could look at is, how do we attract investors to come into our continent? How do we do that? So we need to look at our environment. Do we have the proper investment environment to attract investors? And I think this is one important element that we need to look at. There are, you know, like, for example, our banks, our financial institutions, our infrastructure, our airport, our road networks. There are so many other, our ease of doing business, getting permits to have a company implanted in Africa. So it's a whole, how do you call that, approach that we have to look into with several other, our services. You see what I mean, Chair? We have to have a holistic approach so that we can attract investors and so that we can attract industries to come onto our continent and build their manufacturing. Because what does private sector look at? At the end of the day, private sector will look at the profit they get. If they get more profit having a manufacturing unit in India or in China or in Switzerland, why would they come to Africa? They will come to us if we give them this, you know, motivation that, okay, guys, you can come in because you make profit also on our countries. So this is something we have to think of. How do we do the ease of doing business get better in Africa?
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very pertinent question. And, you know, when you look at some of the companies, they consider that our economies are too small to support, you know, companies to put up, you know, manufacturing plants in the continent. And some of these aspects, which was touched on slightly by Jean Bashono, was about how do we ensure that we have the economies of scale that can then make it profitable for companies to actually establish their manufacturing facilities in the continent. And you are aware that in the past few months, perhaps, or in the past few years, that there are companies that are withdrawn from the continent in terms of looking at where they were manufacturing, looking at the siloed kind of regulatory environment that we have. We are not able to sell in volumes that make profits. How do we counter that so that we are able to attract those companies to come to the continent? What is your vision on that?
Yes, and I think I would invite more comments on that. But that is what I am saying, Chair. It's not like you look only at pharmaceuticals in a small, you know, subset. What you need to look at is your whole environment of investors, of investment. How do you attract investment into your country? I don't really agree. You know, I mean, like, for example, textiles and clothing, some of our countries in Africa has been able to develop those manufacturing companies so well. The environment has been so inducive and motivating that people came in, invested, have you know, grown industrialization put on their factories here and have been able to produce and export massively and make profit. What I'm saying is this is what you have to look at, your regulatory system. Now, I think one of the, or many of the speakers before me spoke about regulatory systems that we have, how we have to look at our regulations. But I think we need more, like I was saying, you know, your financial sector. Investors will come in if you've got your good, you know, your banking system is solid. If you have got the right infrastructure, you've got the good road network, you have got the laboratories, the infrastructure, the buildings, and everything, you know, that goes with it, the road network, the internet that matches, your electricity, your machines, etc. So this is what we need. We need a holistic approach so that we can attract those pharmaceutical companies to come more massively and be present on our continent. This is the, I find that this is something that we can discuss later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think this is the challenge, and this is the vision we want. Now, I will go back to all the other presenters now and to get their last views. What do they think? Perhaps you have even scanned through the charts. You've seen the questions people have raised. What are your last views? 1 minute for each person, please, so that we are saving on time. Professor, let's start with you.
All right. I hope that I'm able to be there. I liked the engagement from Hassan. He raised a very important aspect, which I am saying, it is true. Africa, based on Kwame Nkrumah, what he saw in 1963 and what we have confirmed, has abundant resources. These, in short, are genetic resources, but also geographic indicators. When I'm mentioning issues of GR, but also GI, I'm referring to issues of intellectual property. We cannot afford at this point in time to export without understanding the scientific merit and benefit of our genetic resources, but also genetic indicators. If a company, an investor comes to Africa and introduces an industry, picks the flora from wheresoever our communities are, and is able to do extractions with or without the knowledge of the community, the indigenous people, and does not obey or practice ABSA, which is access to benefit sharing agreements based on the Nagoya Protocol. That is a crime. So we must be able now to be putting strict regulation regarding how there should be benefit to the citizens, but also how we ourselves, even if investors cannot come to Africa, industry cannot come to plant within Africa, we have brains and a backbone. What is it that we ourselves, within the means and resources that we have, are able to do? I'm sure that Homo sapiens, we are thinking beings, and I would like to challenge each one of us and beyond to be able to exploit what we have within our own backyards. I hate to see books which are authored by someone far away, thousands and kilometers away, telling you the scientific name of a herb that you have within your backyard and telling you that it can help to as a therapeutic or therapy to cancer condition or any of the burdens of diseases that we are suffering as Africans. I submit.
Thank you very much, Prof. Indeed, growing the local capacities to extract what is necessary from our natural resources for purposes of healthcare is very important. I come to our second presenter on your last word, Dr. Jim.
Thank you, Ruben. So, for me, I think we should rely on ourselves. So, I was listening to Ms. Puna, I think, I don't know if I'm right regarding his name. So I don't think, for me, my opinion is that we should rely on ourselves, because putting the right framework for foreign companies to come and settle companies, pharmaceutical companies here, pharmaceutical plants, will not be the solution for me. I think it will take time. We should rely on ourselves and create the right framework for local people to undertake to construct local pharmaceutical plants. I was involved in pharmaceutical construction in my home country, and I got the opportunity to see how challenges are, and definitely we should rely on ourselves, not rely on foreign people to come in our country to set a pharmaceutical company. I don't think they will come, because it will take time for us to have the right framework for them. So, and we should also take courageous action. Sometimes I think we are talking a lot, but there is no action to go forward. I mean, to strengthen our national QC lab. I mean, to strengthen our regulatory bodies. And then create the right framework for people to be able to have money with banks or other institutional finance institution. So that will help local people to undertake projects, to product even the basic for African people. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thank you. So emphasis on growing the local capacities to establish manufacturing, factories for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, and strengthening the regulatory framework that can encourage and streamline the industries. Thank you very much, Dr. Fleo. Pauline, your last word on this particular aspect. What would you put in place to ensure that the things worked the way they're supposed to work? Please. 1 minute.
Sure, I'll try. I think one of we have a really unprecedented opportunity as Africa through Africa Medicines Agency. I say that regulatory convergence is one of our winning opportunities here. The context in which regulatory convergence is being looked at is eliminating systems and barriers that are currently trade barriers or technical barriers or barriers that are against ensuring that we have good systems. I want to also speak to something that I wasn't able to mention in my presentation, and it's a current movement happening with national regulatory authorities. There is a benchmarking that is done by the World Health Organization, and the benchmarking looks at having national regulatory authorities achieving a standard or an assessment level, and there are 4 assessment levels: 1, 2, 3, and 4. And currently, we have national regulatory authorities in Africa, Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, that are already assessed and are at maturity level 3. Kenya was assessed in July of this year, and that review is still undergoing. And it was also the first time in globally that the reviewing or piloting for medical devices is being done. And this is, like I said, when we raise the standards and we know and we put a bar for which we can have reference as a reference point, we will be able to really accelerate and support provision of good products by ensuring that national regulatory authorities are themselves at a standard that is acceptable. So it's a movement that is happening. It's something that we should support. Countries need to be encouraged countries need to be able to be given the opportunity and the platform to do it, because once we have a high standard and once we can achieve high levels of regulation, then it in turn means that the products or accessibility of products in our markets will also be of high quality and cost effective and also of good quality. I believe it's the right opportunity and the right time, and it's ripe for Africa to be able to take this step and to be able to step forward boldly and do it together. That would be my parting shot.
Thank you very much. The benchmarking and the harmonization of standards, and of course taking the opportunity or that are availed through the African Continental Food Trade Area to have that regulatory convergence that will assist in terms of moving forward. I thank you very much. I'll move to Maria, your last word on the seminar today.
I think Poonam has raised her hand. Maybe she wanted to.
I'm going to her very soon.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to her very soon after Maria.
Yes, so I agree with all the panelists' last points. I think the harmonization of not only for standards, but regulatory policy is very, very critical, especially in the world of, advancing clinical trials within Africa. I think the most important point here is that if we really want to move towards the concept of targeted and precision therapeutics, that the clinical trials process must be inclusive, and that means including diverse populations, different potential populations that are impacted by social determinants of health, not only just their medical and clinical profile, but more importantly, I think for Africa, the opportunity to get involved in pilots and projects with the use of all these new technologies, from the mobile technologies for artificial intelligence and blockchain, to make some of this process a little more autonomous and digitalized, which would perhaps relieve the strain on the human capacity to get these projects done, all offer promising opportunities for advancing not only decentralized clinical trials, but overall clinical research and trials on the continent.
Thank you very much, Maria. Taking advantage of the new technologies to advance and the clinical trials and have better participation, but of course with better data protection and such. So we thank you very much. We shall be looking forward to having more presentations on the same. Poonam, I come to you. You raised your hand, and you can address your question as well as give us your last remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. No, it's not a question. It's just to reassure my colleagues who just spoke before me. I am not at all, we are in the AFCFTA, and here we are building Africa. And of course, our aim is to rely on ourselves. This goes without saying. This is what we are all doing. We are constructing Africa. What I added, I added this because we hadn't had a chance today to speak about FDI, and I thought everything else had been said by my colleagues before me, fellow panelists. So I thought, let me add something on FDI. And I think that if we are serious, and if we really want to do something concretely, we want to export, we want to trade, we need what we call, the environment to attract, even if ourselves, even be it Africans ourselves, we want to build a manufacturing unit of pharmaceuticals, we need to have all the others infrastructure in place. That is all that I'm saying. We need to look at our banking sector. Like I said, we need to look at all our, technology. Pharmaceuticals, I come from Mauritius myself, and, in Mauritius, they've been trying to attract pharmaceuticals manufacturing companies. And we know how hard it is, because it's such a technologically intensive sector. Hence, that's all that I was saying. I was talking about the investment and the infrastructure that you have to look at in all these sectors. When you're talking about trade, Chair, of course, in the AFCFTA, you know that we are looking at removal of tariffs, but this depends, of course, on state members. We at the AFCFTA Secretariat, we are doing our maximum to help our member states to remove as much as possible tariffs to enable trade. We are looking also at the non-tariff barriers, like I mentioned, to remove obstacles to trade, elimination of non-tariff barriers. And that's why I very briefly mentioned that we have an online portal now. Please use it to tell us about non-tariff barriers you experience when you're trading, including in this sector. If we can help, we are here to help member states overcome those barriers to trade. And so we have got a subcommittee, we've got in fact 3 subcommittees looking at barriers to trade, on SPS issues, on technical barriers to trade, and on non-tariff barriers. That's a very whole big picture, but please contact me. I'm very happy to share with you everything we can from the Secretariat here to help you in these sectors. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Poonam. And indeed, we look forward to the creation of an environment that enables, investments, where it is by, local investors or by, external foreign, investors that is encouraged in the continent. And of course, we do believe that the removal of technical barriers to trade and non-tariff barriers to trade and then SPS issues will create this environment. Now, as usual, we shall be having another webinar, and I thank all the panelists for today. I'm sure that we shall be calling upon you to give us more presentations, if not this year, next year, based on other themes that we shall have come up with in consultation with the stakeholders. So I take this opportunity to just welcome you to the next webinar that will be taking place on 28th. The theme will be continental certification marks based on quite a number of landmark decisions that have been made in the past, where we are looking at having a single quality mark for products in the continent. That is one of the things that is going to happen, and perhaps we shall be looking at what kind of materials or products that shall be being subjected to that kind of certification. And I believe, as I indicated, that medical devices and equipment should be part of this, including, of course, the pharmaceuticals and medicinal products. I thank you all. Let's end our deliberations here today, and hope that in the next webinar we shall have developed, sufficient interest to participate and contribute. Now, what we do have on the chat, these questions will continue, and we shall be able to address some of them. Those who are the panelists. The last act in the webinar. Let's see all of you put on your cameras. In 1 minute, we shall be done. Yeah, then you will tell us when you're finished.
We are done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and keep well. Until next time.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.